Okay, I want you to do something for me. Take a second and just look around your office right now. Or, if you're on your commute, just visualize your team.
Okay, got it.
Think about the accountants, the folks in HR, the engineers, maybe those sales guys over in the corner.
The loud ones.
Hey, yeah, the loud ones. Now, pick 50 of them. And try to pick the smartest, most capable people you know, the ones with the PhDs, the ones who always, just crush their quarterly reviews.
All right, I've got my fantasy survivor team rostered in my head.
Good. So now we're going to run a little simulation. We're taking those 50 modern humans, the absolute cream of the corporate crop, and we're also finding a troop of, say, 50 capuchin monkeys from Costa Rica.
Okay.
We load both teams onto a cargo plane, fly them over some remote, dense tropical forest in Central Africa, and we kick them out the door.
With parachutes, I hope.
Parachutes on, obviously. We aren't monsters.
I mean, the monkeys probably have a better chance of surviving the fall, but I appreciate the gesture for the humans.
That's a fair point. But here's the setup for our little game. The monkeys get nothing. They go in completely naked just as they are.
As nature intended.
Exactly, the humans.
Yeah.
We're feeling benevolent today. We'll let them keep their clothes. But that is it. Absolutely it. No matches to start a fire, no survival knives, no shoes.
Ouch.
Yeah, I hope you wore sturdy loafers to work today. No eyeglasses.
Oh, that's immediately going to take out half the IT department.
Immediately. And certainly, absolutely no iPhones, no Google.
So we're stripping away every single external tool, every piece of tech. We're just leaving them with their massive biological brains.
Precisely. And the challenge is simple. We leave both groups there for 2 years. We come back and we count the survivors. The team with the most heartbeats left on the board wins. Now, you've read Joseph Henrich's work, The Secret of Our Success.
I have.
So you know exactly where this is going. Who are you putting your money on?
Oh, it's not even a gamble. It's not even a question. It's the monkeys.
In a landslide.
In a complete and utter landslide. Honestly, I would be genuinely shocked if a single one of the humans was still alive after 3 months, let alone 2 years.
See, that hurts my ego a little bit.
Yeah.
We're the dominant species. We split the atom. We built the pyramids, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
You really think 50 smart, cooperative humans can't outlast a bunch of monkeys in the woods?
I really, really do. And this gets to a fundamental misunderstanding we have about our own species. We look in the mirror and we see this autonomous, intelligent problem solver.
A MacGyver.
The MacGyver, exactly. We think, well, I'm smart. I'd figure it out. I'd build a shelter. I'd identify which plants are edible. I'd make some sort of trap.
It's the Robinson Crusoe fantasy. I think we all have it deep down.
We all have it. But what Henrich argues is that biologically, if you strip away our entire cultural inheritance, we are actually an incredibly fragile species. I mean, just think about that jungle scenario purely physically. Compared to the capuchins, we are agonizingly slow. We are terrible climbers. We have no claws. Our teeth are pathetic for tearing raw meat. And here's the kicker that people always forget. Our guts.
Our guts? What's wrong with our guts? I thought I had a stomach of steel.
You might think so, but compared to other primates, we have terrible stomachs. We cannot detoxify raw plants the way they can. If you or I just walked into that jungle and started nibbling on leaves that looked, vaguely like salad,
We'd be in a world of hurt.
we'd be dead, or at least violently ill within days. We are biologically dependent on cooked food. Our entire digestive system has evolved around the assumption of fire. We need fire just to get enough calories to survive. Yeah. Be honest. Do you know how to start a fire with 2 sticks?
I mean, I've watched the YouTube videos. I have the theoretical knowledge.
Right. Now try doing it in a 90% humidity rainforest with no knife to carve the wood, no dry tinder, and 50 hungry, panicking coworkers yelling at you.
Yeah, okay. Point taken.
Yeah.
Good luck.
So the monkeys win because they have the right hardware. They have the instincts. They have the genetic software that's preloaded for that specific environment.
And we don't.
We don't. We're running a completely different operating system, one that requires a whole suite of external accessories just to function. And that really brings us to the core mission of this deep dive today. We're looking at Joseph Henrich's The Secret of Our Success. And the title itself is a bit of a misdirection, isn't it?
It really is, because when we hear success, we immediately think personal genius. We love the great man theory of history, Steve Jobs, Einstein, Elon Musk.
Right, these singular, brilliant minds.
But Henrich is arguing the complete opposite.
He's saying the secret to our species' success isn't that we're individually brilliant. It's that we are, for lack of a better word, addicted to culture. We're a species that requires a massive software download from our community just to survive the day.
And without that download.
Without that accumulated knowledge from thousands of generations, we aren't the masters of the planet. We're just a fat, slow, vulnerable primate that makes for a pretty easy snack for a leopard.
Fat, slow, and vulnerable. I feel personally attacked. But let's move beyond the hypothetical. Because Henrich doesn't just ask us to take his word for it with a thought experiment about monkeys.
No, he brings the receipts.
He brings what I call the receipts. He digs into the historical archives to find these amazing and often tragic stories that he calls the Lost European Explorer files.
And these stories are just so fascinating because they are, in essence, real-world versions of our little thought experiment. We have actual data on what happens when you take highly intelligent, educated Westerners, the best and the brightest of their time, and you drop them into a survival environment without their familiar toolkit.
And the results.
Yeah.
They aren't just, oh, they struggled a bit. The results are usually catastrophic, horrifying death.
Almost always.
So let's start with the big one, the one everyone's heard of, but maybe not in this context. The Franklin expedition, 1845.
This is the absolute gold standard of misplaced confidence. Hubris, really. Sir John Franklin sets out with 2 ships to find the Northwest Passage, the sea route through the Arctic to Asia.
And you have to understand, this wasn't some ragtag group of adventurers.
Not at all. This was the Royal Navy. This was the Apollo 11 of the 19th century, the absolute peak of British technological and imperial might.
So give us a sense of the scale here. What were they packing? Because I think we have this image of old-timey explorers just, winging it with a sextant and a prayer.
Oh, not even close. They had 2 of the most advanced ships on the planet, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. These things were marvels of engineering. They had reinforced hulls to deal with the ice. They had steam engines, which was cutting-edge tech. That's the nuclear reactor of the 1840s.
So they weren't just relying on sails?
No, they had retractable screw propellers to avoid ice damage. They even had an internal heating system that circulated hot water through pipes to keep the cabins warm.
Wow, so they basically tried to bring a little slice of London with them. They tried to terraform the ship.
They absolutely did. And the provisions. My God, the provisions. They weren't planning to hunt or forage much at all. They brought, and I actually looked up the manifest on this, 8,000 tins of preserved meat, soups, and vegetables.
8,000.
They had tons of flour, chocolate, liquor for the officers. They even had a desalinator to make fresh water. And significantly, they brought a library.
A library in the Arctic.
A 1,200-volume library. They literally brought the accumulated written knowledge of Western civilization with them. Science, literature, religion, navigation, all the big books.
Okay, so you have 105 men. They are disciplined naval officers. They're educated. They are ridiculously well-fed. And they have steam engines. They are the peak of 19th century civilization.
That stuck. The ice freezes solid around them near King William Island in the Canadian Arctic.
Now, for anyone listening and trying to visualize this, King William Island sounds completely desolate, like a barren white wasteland where nothing could possibly survive. That's the image I get when I think of the Franklin expedition, just white death.
That is exactly what the British saw. They looked out from their frozen ships and saw white silence. Nothing. Death. But here is the contrast that Henrich just hammers home, and it is the most important part of this whole story. That exact same island was home to the Netsilik Inuit.
And they weren't just barely surviving there.
No. They were thriving, they were raising children there, they were caring for their elderly, they had a complex social life, stories, religion. They had been living there for millennia. In fact, they called the main harbor on that island Uksuktuk.
Which translates to...
Lots of fat.
That is just a brutally cruel irony. The British are literally starving to death in a place called Lots of Fat.
It's devastating. The Inuit looked at that exact same landscape and saw a grocery store. The British looked at it and saw a grave. And the difference wasn't biology. It wasn't raw intelligence. The British sailors had the same brains, arguably better education in terms of book smarts and literacy. But the Inuit had the cultural download.
Okay, let's break down that download, because we talk about survival skills like it's just common sense you pick up. But what specifically did the Inuit know that 105 of Britain's finest couldn't figure out?
It's a million little things that all add up to survival. It's this intricate web of knowledge. So, take seal hunting. In the winter, seals live under the sea ice, but they have to come up for air, so they maintain these little breathing holes.
Right.
Now, to the untrained eye, to the British eye, these holes are completely invisible. They're covered with a thin layer of snow. You could walk right over one 100 times and never know that dinner was 6 inches beneath your boots.
So how on earth did the Inuit find them?
Well, first, they had co-evolved with their dogs. They learned to use their dog's sense of smell to locate the holes, but finding the hole is only step one. Step two is the patience and the deep knowledge of seal behavior. They knew exactly how to stand. They knew how to build a tiny little indicator tool, sometimes with a feather or a bit of down, that would move ever so slightly when the seal exhaled. They knew how to stand perfectly still for hours in sub-zero temperatures and exactly when to strike with the harpoon to guarantee a kill.
And the British? They were stuck there for how long?
19 months. They were stuck on that island for 19 months. That's 2 full winters. That is more than enough time to observe, to experiment, to figure it out. If human intelligence was truly this improvisational MacGyver-like thing we imagine it to be,
But they couldn't do it.
they couldn't. The archaeological evidence shows no signs of successful seal hunting. They didn't know how to build proper snow houses, so they stayed in the freezing metal ships or in flimsy canvas tents, burning their precious coal until it ran out.
I read about the driftwood factor, too. That just blew my mind. Because your immediate assumption is, well, there's no wood in the Arctic.
Oh, the wood. Yes, this is a perfect example. So the Inuit make these incredible composite bows to hunt caribou. But you're right, there are no trees on King William Island, so where do they get the wood?
I have no idea.
They possess a collective, multi-generational mental map of the ocean currents. They know that specific currents will deposit driftwood on specific beaches at certain times of the year. They know exactly where to go and when to harvest the raw materials for their technology.
And the British?
The British were probably burning that same driftwood for a few minutes of warmth or just ignoring it entirely. They certainly weren't building complex composite bows. They didn't even have the first clue how to start.
So the end result?
105 men died. Starvation, scurvy, lead poisoning from their tinned food exposure. They eventually abandoned the ships and tried to walk south, dragging these ridiculously heavy lifeboats filled with silverware, books, and officers' uniforms.
They died dragging their culture behind them.
Exactly. Because it was the wrong culture for that environment. It was useless.
It just completely dismantles that MacGyver myth, doesn't it? We have this fantasy that if you put a smart guy in a room, he'll build a radio out of a coconut. But what Henrich is saying is, no, you won't. You'll just die hungry holding the coconut.
Unless you have a grandmother who spent her entire life teaching you the 20-step process for turning that specific type of coconut into a functional radio, that's the distinction. The genius isn't in the individual, it's in the transmission from the grandmother.
Okay, let's switch climates just to prove this isn't some unique, the Arctic is really hard problem.
Oh.
Let's go to Australia, 1860. The Burke-and-Wills expedition.
Ah, yes. This one, for me, hits even harder in some ways because they were so close to salvation. They were literally surrounded by food.
So set the scene for us. What was their mission?
Robert Burke and William Wills. Their goal is to be the first to cross Australia from south to north, from Melbourne to the Gulf of Carpentaria. And again, this is a well-funded, prestigious expedition. They even imported camels from India because they knew it would be a desert crossing.
That seems smart, thinking ahead.
It is logical. Bring the desert animal to the desert. And they actually make it to the north coast, but on the return journey, everything just falls apart. They get stranded at a place called Cooper's Creek. Their supplies are gone. The camels are dying. They are starving.
But as with the Franklin story, they aren't alone.
We're not alone. The local Yonder Wonder people are there. And once again, the locals are thriving. They're healthy, they're well-fed, they're energetic. It's a land of plenty for them.
And Burke and Wills see them eating something.
They do. They observe the local women collecting these little seeds from a fern that grows in the water. The plant is called nardu, and the explorers think, hallelujah, we're saved. We'll just copy what they're doing.
Monkey see, monkey do.
Pretty much. So they start collecting the nardu seeds. They watch the women pounding them into a kind of flour. So they pound them into flour. They bake little cakes over the fire, and they eat them. And their bellies feel full. They even write in their journals, we're eating plenty, the food is good.
But, there's always a but.
There's a huge but. They start getting weaker, their legs start to swell, they get hypothermia. Even in the mild weather, they're just wasting away. It's this horrific paradox. They are starving to death with full stomachs.
What was actually happening inside their bodies? It sounds like some kind of biological trick.
It's chemistry. Nardoo, in its raw state, contains a nasty enzyme called thiaminase. As the name suggests, it destroys thiamine, which is vitamin B1.
And we need vitamin B1.
Your body absolutely needs vitamin B1 for your metabolism to function. It's essential for converting food into energy. Without it, your cells basically forget how to process energy. It causes a disease called beriberi.
So by eating the Nardoo, they weren't just eating empty calories, they were actually eating negative calories. They were actively flushing the vitamin B1 out of their system.
That's a perfect way to put it. The more Nardoo they ate, the faster they died. It was a poison masquerading as a cure.
But the Yandrawandra were eating it all day long. Why weren't they dropping dead? Did they have some kind of genetic immunity?
Nope. They had the cultural processing technique. They didn't just gather and pound the seeds. They had a multi-step process. They would often roast the seeds first. And crucially, after pounding it into flour, they would leach it with large amounts of water, sometimes using ash in the water. This specific, tedious, multi-step process neutralizes the thiaminase.
And Burke and Wills missed that invisible step.
They missed the invisible step, and this is a massive concept for Henrich. He calls it causal opacity.
Causal opacity. Okay, that sounds like a philosophy term. Let's break that down for us.
It just means that the connection between the cause, in this case, the tedious washing process, and the effect, not dying of beriberi weeks later, is opaque. It's hidden. You cannot see thiaminase. You cannot taste the lack of vitamin B1 in your body, at least not immediately.
So if you're a smart, logical individual,
If you're using your reason, you look at the Yandrawandra and you think, okay, they gather, pound, wash, bake, eat. That washing step looks like a lot of work. It seems unnecessary. It looks like ritualistic nonsense. I'll just optimize it.
we love to optimize. Cut out the fluff.
You optimize yourself right into a grave. Burke and Wills couldn't use their reason to solve the problem because the solution wasn't immediately reasonable, it was cultural. And the Yandrawandra themselves probably didn't know the specific chemistry.
They just knew this is the way.
They just knew, this is the way my mother taught me and her mother taught her.
And to make matters worse, Burke didn't just fail to learn. He was actively hostile to learning.
Oh, it's just tragic. The Yandrawandra actually tried to help them. They offered them fish and other foods. They tried to communicate. But Burke was an arrogant Victorian. He was impatient and suspicious. At one point, when the locals came into his camp, maybe asking for gifts or trade, Burke panicked. He fired his pistol over their heads to scare them away.
He literally shot at the only available tech support.
He severed the connection to the collective brain. And that was the end of them. They died right there, by the creek.
It really just drives the point home. Individual intelligence is basically helpless against a causally opaque environment. But Henrich is fair. He does mention a control group. There are explorers who survive these situations.
Yes, and the ones who survive are the ones who check their ego at the door. Look at John Ross in the Arctic. Or even better, Roald Amundsen.
The man who beat Robert Scott to the South Pole.
The very same. And why did he beat Scott? When Amundsen first went to the Arctic, he didn't bring a 1,200-volume library. He brought humility. He intentionally spent 2 winters living with the Netsilik Inuit.
He didn't just observe them, he lived with them.
He became their student. He learned how to drive a dog sled properly. He learned to wear their layered system of fur anoraks instead of the heavy, sweat-inducing wool coats the British favored. He famously said, "One can't do better than copy the Eskimo."
Copy the Eskimo, not innovate on the Eskimo or improve on the Eskimo.
Exactly, copy. He had the wisdom to realize that their technology had thousands of years of R&D behind it. His smart Western ideas were nothing compared to their evolved ideas. He understood that he was the student and they were the masters.
This concept of causal opacity, the idea that we do things without knowing why they work, is really where the book gets incredibly provocative. Because it suggests that blind faith in tradition isn't necessarily stupid.
It suggests that it's actually a superpower. It's the ultimate survival strategy. Henrich uses the example of manioc processing in the Amazon, and it's even more complex and opaque than the Nardoo story.
This is the smart mother thought experiment. I love this one because I can see myself making this exact mistake. I think any modern efficiency-minded person would.
Oh, me too. Without a doubt. So manioc, you might know it as cassava or yucca, is a staple crop for millions of people. It's great. It grows in poor soil. It's drought resistant. But many varieties are bitter and full of something called cyanogenic glucosides.
Which is a very fancy word for cyanide, not something you want in your lunch.
Definitely not. Now, indigenous groups like the Tucanoans in the Amazon have this processing ritual that is punishingly long and laborious. We're talking days of scraping, grating, washing the pulp in special baskets, boiling the liquid, letting the fiber sit for 2 days. It's an enormous chore. It takes up a huge percentage of a woman's life.
And if you were to ask a Tucanoan woman, why do you go through all this trouble? Why don't you skip that second wash?
Yeah.
What does she say? Does she pull out a chemistry textbook and explain the molecular breakdown of cyanide?
No, of course not. She says, this is how we do it. Or maybe it removes the bitter taste, or it prevents the stomach ache, or simply because it is the custom of our ancestors.
Okay, so here's the thought experiment. Enter the smart mother.
Right. Imagine a woman in that tribe who's a bit of a biohacker. She's skeptical, she has a high IQ, she's an innovator, and she looks at this 3-day process and thinks, this isn't efficient. I'm wasting my life grating this tuber.
She wants to disrupt the manioc industry.
She does. And she runs an experiment. She notices that if she just boils the manioc for a long time, the bitter taste goes away. The acute poisoning, the immediate stomach ache is gone.
The immediate feedback loop tells her, problem solved, bitterness is gone, my family isn't getting sick right after dinner.
Exactly. So she feeds it to her kids. They don't complain. They say it tastes fine. She has just saved herself days and days of back-breaking labor. She has more time to weave or rest or play with her children. From the outside, she looks like the winner. She's the genius.
But the low-level cyanide is still in the food.
It is, just at lower chronic levels. And this is the deadly trap of causal opacity. Chronic cyanide poisoning doesn't kill you today or tomorrow. It accumulates in the body. Over years, it attacks the thyroid gland. It causes goiters. It damages the nervous system, leading to a paralysis condition called konzo.
So 10 years later, her husband might lose the ability to walk, her kids might have developmental issues, their family line weakens and dies out.
But because the time delay is so long, years, even a decade, she never connects the dots. She never has that aha moment of, oh, it was the shortcut I took with the manioc back in 2015. The cause and the effect are completely severed by time.
Meanwhile, the traditional mother.
The one who didn't ask questions, the one who just blindly followed the tedious generations-old ritual because grandma said so. Her family is healthy, they thrive.
So natural selection, or in this case, cultural selection, favors the people who don't think too much. It favors the imitators.
It favors the over-imitators. We are evolutionarily programmed to be high-fidelity copiers, to copy everything, even the steps that seem silly or wasteful, because our ancestors could never be sure which silly step was actually the life-saving one.
This explains so much about basic human behavior. We are just copying machines. We see a celebrity go on a new diet, we copy it. We see our neighbor buy a certain car, we suddenly want it.
And when a whole society stops copying the right things, when we let our modern science or logic override a tradition without fully understanding it, we get widespread disasters. Look at the pellagra epidemic in the American South.
The corn story. This is another case of Europeans borrowing the hardware, but not the software, right?
A classic case. Maize, or corn, was the miracle crop of the New World. Europeans took it back home, and eventually it became a cheap, easy-to-grow staple for poor farmers, especially in Italy and the American South. But almost immediately, these populations started getting this horrific disease, pellagra.
What does pellagra actually do to you?
It was known as the disease of the 4Ds: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and ultimately death. People's skin would get this horrible, scaly sunburn that never healed. They'd have crippling digestive issues, and then they would literally go insane. It was a terrifying plague.
And for the longest time, the medical establishment thought it was a germ, right?
Yeah.
They were looking for a bacteria or a virus.
They were obsessed with the germ theory of disease. This was the early 1900s. It had to be infectious. But the reality was it was a nutritional deficiency. A lack of niacin, which is vitamin B3.
But wait, corn has niacin in it?
It does, but it's chemically locked up in a form that the human gut can't absorb. It just passes right through you, unless you treat the corn with an alkali.
Like ash.
Like wood ash or burnt seashells or slaked lime. Native American cultures had been eating corn as their primary staple for thousands of years without ever getting pellagra. Why? Because they always prepared it using a process called nixtamalization. They would soak or boil the corn with ash or lime.
And that process unlocks the niacin.
It unlocks the niacin, and it also adds calcium and makes it more complete protein. It turns corn into a genuine superfood.
But when the Europeans borrowed the corn, they didn't borrow the ash.
They saw the ash and thought, that's just dirt. That's primitive. Why would I put dirt in my food? They cleaned it up. They applied their hygienic logic, and in doing so, they turned a superfood into a slow poison that killed hundreds of thousands of people.
It took science decades to finally admit that the primitive method was actually a sophisticated chemical process.
Decades. Because it was causally opaque. The link between soaking corn in burnt seashells and not going insane 10 years from now is not at all obvious. You need the culture to bridge that gap. A doctor named Joseph Goldberger eventually figured it out, but even he had to fight the medical establishment for years because they wanted a cleaner, germ-based explanation.
This leads to a really uncomfortable but fascinating realization. We like to think we're these rational agents making logical choices. But Henrich suggests that a lot of what we do, our taboos, our use of spices, our rituals, are things we do blindly. And that blindness is a huge part of why we're alive.
Blindness is a feature, not a bug. If every individual had to scientifically verify the reason behind every single cultural practice before adopting it, our species would have died out eons ago. We have to trust the library of accumulated knowledge. Take spices, for instance. Why do we put things like garlic, chili, and onion in our food, especially in hot climates?
The simple answer is because it tastes good.
That's the proximate answer. That's the immediate reason. But why does it taste good to us? What's the ultimate evolutionary reason? Well, those spices are powerful antimicrobials. In a world before refrigeration, meat spoils fast, especially in the tropics. Spicy food was safe food.
So evolution shaped our taste buds to enjoy the flavors of things that kill bacteria.
Precisely. We think we're chasing a flavor profile, but we're actually chasing survival.
And the Fijian fish taboos.
Same exact principle. In Fiji, there are very strict, specific taboos for pregnant and nursing women against eating certain types of reef fish. A scientific analysis of those fish shows that they are the ones most likely to have high levels of ciguatera toxin.
And that toxin is especially bad for a developing fetus.
Devastating for a fetus. But it doesn't really harm an adult much. The women don't know the toxicology reports. They just follow the taboo their grandmothers taught them, and it protects their babies.
It's just incredible. We're all surviving on this vast web of blind wisdom. But Henrich takes this a massive step further. He says this reliance on culture didn't just change our behavior. It literally changed our bodies. It started to drive our biological, genetic evolution. This is the moment he calls crossing the Rubicon.
This is such a pivotal concept in the book. The Rubicon is the point of no return. It's the threshold where cultural evolution, the evolution of our tools, our techniques, our social norms, becomes the primary driver of our genetic evolution.
We usually think of it the other way around. Genes change, our brain gets bigger, and then we invent better tools.
Henrich flips that entire script, he says. No, we stumbled onto some simple tools and techniques like controlling fire. Those tools made life a little easier, which created an environment where there was a selective advantage for brains that were slightly better at learning and using those tools, which led to better tools, which put more pressure on our brains to get bigger.
It's a feedback loop.
It's an autocatalytic cycle. Culture and genes begin to drive each other forward in a runaway process.
And the most obvious and maybe most shocking piece of evidence for this is right in our own bodies, our digestive tract.
Right. If you compare a human to our closest relative, a chimpanzee, the difference is stark. A chimp has a massive gut, a really long colon. It spends something like 6 hours a day just chewing tough, fibrous plant matter. It's a digestion factory on legs.
And humans.
Humans, we have pathetically small stomachs, short colons, and weak little jaws with tiny teeth.
We are the wimps of the primate world.
We truly are. But why? Because at some point, we outsourced our digestion. We invented fire and cooking. Cooking is pre-digestion. It uses external energy to break down cell walls and proteins before the food even touches your lips.
Outsourced digestion. I love that framing. So because we started cooking, our bodies basically said, hey, we don't need to maintain this massive, expensive stomach anymore.
Exactly. Gut tissue is metabolically expensive. It takes a huge amount of energy to run a big digestive system. Brain tissue is also incredibly expensive. You can't really afford to have a massive gut and a massive brain. So once culture in the form of fire allowed us to shrink our guts, we suddenly had a huge surplus of energy. And where did evolution spend that surplus?
On the brain.
On the brain. We literally traded our guts for our brains. But that means we are committed, we have crossed the Rubicon, we can't go back. You can't survive on a diet of raw, wild food like a chimp can. We are biologically addicted to our own invention. If you put a modern human in the forest without fire, they will starve to death, even if surrounded by edible plants.
It also explains other weird things about our bodies, like we're terrible sprinters compared to a cheetah, but we're amazing endurance runners.
Fat and weak, as Henrich puts it. But we evolved to be incredible throwers and the best long-distance runners on the planet. Why? Because we had the cultural know-how to make spears, to track animals over long distances, and to carry water in containers. We didn't need to be strong enough to wrestle a wildebeest to the ground. We just needed to be smart enough to pursue it for hours until it collapsed from heat exhaustion, and then finish it with a well-aimed projectile. Our anatomy reflects our cultural strategies.
Even our eye color is a product of our culture. This one really surprised me when I first read it.
This is such a cool, subtle example of culture-gene coevolution. Blue eyes. This trait seems to have spread rapidly in the Baltic region of Europe along with the spread of agriculture.
Okay, what does farming have to do with blue eyes?
The theory is that as these populations switched from a hunter-gatherer diet of meat and fish to a cereal-based diet of grains, they started getting a lot less vitamin D from their food.
So the diet change, which is a cultural shift, created a vitamin deficiency.
Right. And if you live in high latitudes with very little sunlight, you need to be able to synthesize vitamin D in your skin. The best way to do that is to have lighter skin. So there was intense selective pressure for genes that produce lighter skin. And it just so happens that the genes for light skin are genetically linked to the genes for blue eyes. The selective sweep for light skin dragged the blue eye genes along for the ride.
So farming culture drove the genetic evolution of blue eyes. We literally shaped our own genome through our cultural practices.
That's wild, isn't it? But it brings up a huge question, the startup problem, as Henrich calls it. If this culture gene feedback loop is so great, why are we the only ones who did it? Why don't chimpanzees have libraries? Why don't dolphins have their own version of Wikipedia?
Seems like a pretty good trick if you can pull it off.
It is, but it's incredibly hard to get started. It's a chicken and the egg problem. Big brains are ridiculously expensive. They require a ton of calories. They mean you have to be born premature and helpless just to get that giant head out of the birth canal.
Human babies are notoriously useless, let's be honest.
Oh,
A foal can run minutes after being born. A human baby is a lump for a year.
exactly. So from a purely biological standpoint, natural selection generally opposes bigger brains. A bigger brain is only a good investment if there is already a large body of smart culture out there to download complex tools, food processing techniques, social strategies. That's the only way the big brain pays for itself.
But you can't have that smart culture in the first place without big brains to invent and maintain it.
There's the trap. You need the brain to get the culture, but you need the culture to justify the cost of the brain. It's a deep evolutionary valley that is very, very hard to cross. Most species get stuck on one side. Humans, probably through a lucky combination of environmental pressures and subtle pre-existing adaptations in social learning, somehow managed to build a rickety bridge across that valley,
We got just enough culture to make being a slightly better learner profitable.
which led to a little more culture and then a little better learning, and suddenly the autocatalytic cycle ignited. We crossed the Rubicon.
And once we crossed it, we weren't just a smarter ape anymore. We became something entirely new, a collective brain.
That's it.
And this is the last major section of our discussion, and I think this is the part that really challenges our modern individualistic ego, because we still want to believe that innovation comes from the lone genius.
We do. We worship the great man theory. We picture Edison in his lab or Newton under the apple tree having this singular flash of brilliance. But Henrich argues that intelligence is fundamentally social, not individual.
He uses a fascinating simulation model to illustrate this. He calls it geniuses versus butterflies. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it's a great little thought experiment. Imagine a computer simulation with two populations. Population A is filled with geniuses. These are super smart individuals, high IQ, incredible problem solvers, but they're antisocial. They're loners. They don't share their ideas very well.
The moody artist colony.
Exactly. Then you have population B, the butterflies. These are people of average intelligence, nothing special going on upstairs, but they are hypersocial. They're constantly watching each other, copying each other, sharing everything they learn.
So who wins the tech race? Who ends up with the best tools over time?
The butterflies. The butterflies win every single time, and it's not even close.
That feels so counterintuitive. Why don't the geniuses win? They're the ones having the brilliant ideas.
Because innovation isn't just about having a good idea. It's about keeping it in the population and improving upon it. In that small population of loner geniuses, one guy might invent a slightly better fishing net. That's great. But if he dies in an accident, or if he's just weird and nobody likes him enough to learn from him, that innovation is lost. It dies with him.
It's a dead end.
A total dead end. Whereas with the butterflies,
They're all sharing.
they're all sharing everything. If one average person makes a lucky mistake, maybe accidentally weaves the net a little bit tighter and finds it works better, everyone else sees it and immediately copies it. The collective brain of the group latches onto that small improvement. The baseline technology of the whole group ratchets up one notch.
And then someone else makes another lucky mistake on top of that one.
Exactly. And the technology gets better and better generation after generation, eventually surpassing anything a single isolated genius could ever invent in one lifetime.
So for the success of the species, it's better to be a well-connected average person than a lonely genius.
100%. And this isn't just a simulation. We have a tragic, real-world example of this principle in action. It's called the Tasmanian effect.
This story is just mind-blowing. Tasmania,
Yeah.
the island south of Australia.
Right. For most of prehistory, Tasmania was connected to mainland Australia by a land bridge. The people living there shared the full, rich toolkit of the mainland Aboriginal Australians. They had boomerangs, sophisticated bone tools, complex fishing gear, fitted cold-weather clothes. But then, about 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose. The land bridge flooded. Tasmania became an island.
And the population was completely cut off.
Totally isolated. A small population of maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. And over the next 10,000 years, something absolutely stunning happened. The archaeological record shows that they didn't just fail to progress, they went backward. They started losing technology.
They literally forgot how to make things they already had.
Yes. The evidence shows they used to have bone tools, needles, and awls for sewing clothes. They lost them. They stopped catching fish, even though they lived on an island surrounded by the ocean, because they lost the technology for making bone spears and hooks. They lost the ability to make complex, fitted, cold-weather clothing, reducing them to simple capes in a freezing climate. They even lost the boomerang.
Why? I mean, did they just get dumber? Was there some kind of genetic devolution?
No, their individual brains were the same as ours. Their individual intelligence was fine. But their collective brain shrank below a critical threshold.
There weren't enough people.
There weren't enough minds to hold and reliably transmit all of their complex cultural knowledge. Think about it. Cultural transmission is imperfect. Learning a complex skill, like how to fashion a particular kind of bone needle, is hard. You need a master teacher.
You need the grandmother with the coconut radio again.
You always need the grandmother. If your population is too small, you might only have 1 or 2 master bone tool makers at any given time. If they both die in a hunting accident or from a disease before they can fully train an apprentice, that entire skill set can just vanish. It drops out of the collective brain forever.
It's like a use it or lose it principle, but for an entire civilization.
That's a great way to put it. You need a large enough population to serve as a buffer against accidental loss. You need enough interconnected minds to maintain complex skills, let alone improve upon them. Tasmania fell below that threshold, and their world got simpler and harder.
And we see a smaller, more recent version of this with the polar Inuit too, right?
Yes, a perfect little case study from the 1820s. A very similar thing happened. An epidemic swept through a very isolated group of polar Inuit in northern Greenland, and the disease disproportionately killed the elderly.
The knowledge holders, the libraries.
It killed the living libraries of the group, and suddenly the younger generation realized they had lost the knowledge of how to make kayaks, the composite bow, and the 3-pronged fishing spear called a lester.
So their most important technologies just vanished.
Gone in a single generation. Think about the devastating consequence. You're living in the high Arctic, and you can no longer hunt caribou or seals effectively. Their population started to crash. They were on the verge of extinction.
How did they survive?
They got incredibly lucky. Decades later, in 1862, another group of Inuit migrated into their area from Baffin Island. This new group still possessed all of that lost knowledge. They reintroduced the kayak and the bow to the polar Inuit. They got a software update from their neighbors.
A cultural transfusion.
Exactly. And their population bounced back. It just goes to show how utterly dependent we are on this transmitted knowledge. A single generation gap can set a population back thousands of years.
This has such huge implications for our modern world. We tend to think of the internet as just, the distraction machine cat videos and angry arguments. But in this context, the internet is the ultimate collective brain.
It is. We have created, for the first time in history, a truly global collective brain. The rate of innovation today is skyrocketing, not because we are individually smarter than the Victorians, we probably aren't, but because we are so much more massively interconnected.
Innovation happens at the knowledge frontier.
Right. You can only invent the next iPhone if you already know everything there is to know about the current iPhone. The internet allows millions of people to stand right at that frontier together and exchange ideas instantly.
But it relies on something fragile, doesn't it? Something Henrich would call a pro-social norm.
It relies entirely on pro-social norms, on sharing, on trust, on the willingness of people to put their ideas out there. The system only works if people are willing to contribute to the collective brain. If we stop sharing, or if we fragment into isolated, distrustful bubbles, if we shoot at the Yandrawandra, so to speak, we risk a modern digital Tasmanian effect. We risk losing the very complexity that keeps our society running.
That is a very sobering thought. So to bring this all home for our final summary, Henrich concludes that we are, in his words, a new kind of animal.
We really are. We're a superorganism. It's better to think of an individual human not as a lone wolf, but as a single cell in a much larger body. And that body is our cumulative culture. We cannot survive apart from it.
So if we go all the way back to the beginning, to our survivor scenario, the accountants versus the monkeys, the accountants only win under one condition.
If they can access the collective brain.
Right. If they could call a lifeline, if they could download a survival guide to the Central African rainforest, they'd win in a heartbeat.
But alone, with just their raw intelligence, their monkey food.
There's a quote from the conclusion of the book that I just love. Henrich says, "We don't stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on a pyramid of hobbits."
It's so good. It just perfectly encapsulates the idea. The shoulders of giants implies that a few great men like Newton or Einstein lift the rest of us up. But Henrich is saying, no, our collective smartness is actually just our ability to access a vast library of lucky errors, accidental discoveries, and tiny little tweaks made by thousands of generations of average ancestors, the hobbits.
We are standing on the accumulated grind of millions of anonymous people who figured out, hey, if I burn this seashell and put it in the corn, my kids don't get sick.
We are the lucky beneficiaries of millions of lucky mistakes.
We are.
So here's the final provocative thought for everyone listening today. We walk around feeling pretty confident in our own logic, our science, our rationality. But Henrich's work really asks us to take a hard look at the causally opaque rituals and norms in our own lives.
It does. It raises the question. What are you doing today that you think is just tradition or habit or even superstition, but is actually, in some hidden way, keeping you alive or successful? Maybe it's a social norm about how you interact with your colleagues. Maybe it's a dietary habit passed down from your grandmother. Maybe it's the way we raise our children.
We're all so eager to hack our lives, to streamline and optimize everything, just like that smart mother with the manioc. But before you cut out a step in a process just because you don't understand its purpose, remember the Nardu. Remember the pellagra. Sometimes the why is completely invisible, but the survival is very, very real.
You have to respect the software. You don't have to understand every single line of code to know that randomly deleting a chunk of it might just crash the whole system.
Perfectly put.
Thanks for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.